Most men never ask the question directly. They meet a woman who has been single for 5 years, maybe 10, and they assume those years were emotionally neutral. They think she simply waited, quietly, patiently, like nothing inside her changed during all that time. But that is not how human beings work. A woman does not go years without intimacy, touch, desire, emotional closeness, or physical connection without developing survival mechanisms. Some become colder, some become hyper-independent, some learn how to separate sex from emotion so completely that vulnerability starts feeling unsafe, and some bury their loneliness so deep beneath work, routines, and distractions that even they stop recognizing it. That is the part nobody talks about because the woman you meet today may not be the woman she was before. Those years alone changed her nervous system, her expectations, and the way she experiences men. And if you do not understand what happened during those silent years, you may completely misunderstand the person standing in front of you. So before we begin, I want you to tell me something in the comments. Have you ever met a woman who had been single for years and felt like something about her emotional world had become harder to reach? Because what most men notice is only the surface. Society has created a very polished story around female singleness. You hear people talk about self-growth, healing journeys, career goals, solo travel, independence. Everyone celebrates the visible parts, but almost nobody talks about the invisible part, the biological part, the emotional part, the part that still exists after the dinner ends, the phone goes silent, and she climbs into an empty bed night after night. And that silence matters more than people think. A woman does not suddenly stop being human because there is no man in her life. Her body still craves touch. Her nervous system still responds to closeness. Her mind still wants emotional intimacy, validation, affection, desire. Sexuality is not a switch that turns off when circumstances become inconvenient. It simply moves underground. That is why the waiting is never neutral. The longer someone lives without intimacy, the more their system starts adapting to the absence of it. Some women become emotionally restless without understanding why. Others become irritable, numb, anxious, or deeply distracted. Not because they are weak, because human beings were not designed to feel emotionally disconnected forever while pretending everything is perfectly fine. And here is the dangerous part most men miss. When desire has no healthy outlet, people do not just wait. They develop coping patterns, private habits, emotional defenses, entire identities built around surviving the absence. Silence does not erase desire. It only forces people to manage it in private. And once you understand that, you start asking a much more important question. What kind of woman becomes comfortable living that way for years? Not all female singleness comes from the same place. That is the first mistake men make. They see a woman alone for years and assume she simply hasn't found the right guy yet. Sometimes that is true. Many times it is not. Some women become trapped inside a transactional mindset. They stop viewing relationships as connection and start viewing them as evaluation. Every man is tested, measured, compared. He must constantly prove himself worthy of her time, attention, body, or emotional investment. The problem is that when a relationship starts feeling like a permanent audition, emotionally healthy men eventually walk away. Nobody wants to spend years trying to earn warmth from someone who treats affection like leverage. Some women are alone because fear has completely rewired the way they experience intimacy. Betrayal does that. Trauma does that. A painful divorce can do that. The woman who once trusted deeply and got emotionally destroyed rarely returns to the dating world unchanged. Part of her still wants closeness. Another part associates closeness with danger. So she keeps men at arm's length while secretly wondering why connection never fully develops. Then, there are women trapped in outdated self-perception. This one is more common than most people realize. A woman remembers the kind of men she attracted at 23, but she struggles to accept that time changes the dating market for everyone. Instead of adapting, she keeps chasing an idealized fantasy that reality no longer supports. So, every man feels disappointing because no real man can compete with nostalgia. And to be fair, not every woman alone is emotionally dysfunctional. Some consciously postpone relationships, career pressure, family responsibilities, healing after divorce, health issues. Real life exists. But even strategic singleness still shapes psychology over time. That is the part people avoid admitting because whether her loneliness, came from fear, standards, trauma, or choice, the emotional consequences still accumulate quietly beneath the surface. Some women are alone because they cannot trust men. Others are alone because no man can pass the audition. And eventually, both situations begin changing the way they see themselves. The human nervous system changes when intimacy disappears for long enough. Not immediately, quietly, gradually. That is why many women do not even recognize what is happening to them while it is happening. At first, the absence simply feels inconvenient. Then months pass. Then years. Eventually, emotional deprivation stops feeling temporary and starts becoming a lifestyle, and the body keeps score the entire time. Some women become more emotionally reactive. Smaller frustrations hit harder. Patience shortens. Mood swings become more common. Others go in the opposite direction. They become emotionally flat. Harder to excite, harder to reach, harder to emotionally move. When the nervous system goes too long without affection, closeness, reassurance, or physical intimacy, it begins adapting to emotional isolation as the new normal, and that adaptation slowly affects self-worth. A woman may never say it out loud, but after years without feeling deeply desired, many begin questioning themselves in private. Am I still attractive? Am I still wanted? Am I becoming invisible? Then social comparison makes it worse. She watches friends get married, build families, receive affection openly, while she quietly learns how to normalize emotional starvation behind a composed face. That is why independence can be misleading. Some women are genuinely peaceful alone, but others are simply highly practiced at surviving loneliness without showing it. Those are not the same thing. The longer someone goes unseen, the harder it becomes to believe they are still worth choosing. And once that emotional emptiness grows large enough, people start searching for ways to regulate it. Not always healthy ways, not always conscious ways, but ways that allow them to function without confronting how disconnected they actually feel. That is where coping strategies begin entering the picture. One of the most common ways some women cope with long-term loneliness is by separating physical intimacy from emotional intimacy. In other words, they stop looking for connection and start looking for regulation. This is where casual arrangements begin. Sometimes it is a friend with benefits. Sometimes an emotionally unavailable man. Sometimes a married man who cannot offer commitment but can temporarily relieve the feeling of emptiness. The arrangement usually comes with rules. No pressure, no expectations, no vulnerability, just enough closeness to quiet the body for a little while without risking emotional exposure. And in the beginning, it can feel empowering. A woman tells herself she is in control now. No attachment, no disappointment, no dependence on men emotionally. She gets the attention, the validation, the physical release, then returns to her independent life untouched. At least that is what she believes, but the nervous system rarely separates sex and emotion as cleanly as people pretend it does. Over time, repeated emotional compartmentalization changes people. A woman who spends years teaching herself not to emotionally attach during intimacy may eventually struggle to emotionally attach even when she finally wants real love. Her body learned how to stay present physically, while remaining psychologically guarded. That adaptation does not disappear overnight, and many men completely misread it later. They think she is naturally cold, naturally distant, naturally emotionally unavailable. What they are actually witnessing is survival behavior repeated long enough to become personality. A person who learns to survive without emotional attachment may stop knowing how to attach at all. Now, to be clear, not every casual arrangement destroys emotional health. Human beings are complicated, but the longer someone trains themselves to experience closeness without vulnerability, the more difficult genuine intimacy can become later. And this is where many men get confused because the woman may look experienced, confident, sexually open even, yet emotionally she may trust intimacy less than ever before. So let me ask you something. Do you think casual relationships actually heal loneliness? Or do they simply numb it long enough to survive another week? Not every woman turns toward other people when loneliness grows unbearable. Some turn inward instead, completely inward. This is the quieter strategy, the invisible one. The version nobody talks about openly because it feels too private, too uncomfortable, too revealing. But it exists far more than most men realize. Many women learn how to satisfy themselves emotionally and physically without needing another human being involved at all. At first it feels safer, cleaner, more controlled. No rejection, no emotional confusion, no risk of betrayal. She controls the timing, the fantasy, the distance, the outcome. And control can become addictive when vulnerability has hurt someone badly enough. This is also why fantasy becomes powerful. Not just physical stimulation, but emotional imagination. The mind creates scenarios that reality no longer provides. Desire becomes self-contained, predictable, safe. Over time, some women even start preferring controlled stimulation over real emotional intimacy because real intimacy requires uncertainty, patience, and emotional exposure. And once someone becomes deeply attached to emotional control, relationships begin feeling emotionally exhausting. That is the hidden danger. Because physical release does not automatically solve emotional isolation. In fact, sometimes it intensifies it. The momentary relief fades, and the silence afterward feels even heavier than before. The body relaxes, but the loneliness remains untouched underneath it. Some people stop needing connection because control feels less painful. That sentence explains more modern relationships than most people are willing to admit. Again, this is not about judging women. It is about understanding adaptation. Human beings always find ways to regulate pain. The real question is whether the coping mechanism slowly teaches someone to avoid the very vulnerability required for genuine closeness later. And for some women, that answer becomes yes. Some women never cope through casual intimacy. Others never retreat into private fantasy. Instead, they redirect the energy completely. This is the woman who becomes obsessed with productivity. She works constantly, builds businesses, trains relentlessly in the gym, overcommits to routines, stays permanently busy. From the outside, she looks disciplined, focused, high value, emotionally strong, and sometimes she genuinely is. But sometimes the constant motion is serving another purpose entirely. Distraction because silence forces people to feel things they have spent years avoiding. A woman who never slows down, never has to fully confront the ache underneath the movement. So she fills every hour, every weekend, every emotional gap. The body still wants connection, intimacy, closeness, affection. But instead of feeding those needs directly, she converts the emotional energy into achievement, structure, ambition, or self-improvement. And modern culture rewards this adaptation aggressively. People praise her independence, her discipline, her not needing anyone. But very few ask whether the independence is rooted in peace or emotional exhaustion. That distinction matters more than most men understand. Some women do not heal loneliness. They simply outwork it. Others numb themselves differently. Endless streaming, emotional eating, social media validation, attention online, constant stimulation, anything that creates enough dopamine to temporarily overpower emotional emptiness without requiring vulnerability from another human being. And over time, the pattern becomes identity. The woman starts believing she genuinely prefers emotional distance because distance feels familiar now, safe, efficient, manageable. But safety and fulfillment are not the same thing. A person can become incredibly good at surviving emotionally while still feeling profoundly disconnected underneath. And eventually, those survival patterns stop looking temporary. They start becoming permanent parts of personality. That is when the real complications begin. This is the part most men completely misunderstand. They meet a woman after years of singleness and judge her only by her surface behavior. She seems independent, guarded, emotionally difficult to read. Maybe she struggles with closeness. Maybe she pulls away after intimacy. Maybe she craves connection one moment and becomes distant the next, and men often assume that is simply her personality. Many times it is not. It is adaptation. Human beings adjust to whatever environment they survive in long enough. If a woman spends years emotionally protecting herself, eventually the protection stops feeling temporary. It becomes automatic. She no longer consciously decides to keep distance. Her nervous system does it for her. That is why some women struggled to receive genuine affection even when they desperately want love. They became so used to handling life alone that emotional dependence now feels dangerous. Vulnerability feels unnatural. Needing someone feels weak. So the moment intimacy deepens, panic quietly appears underneath the surface. You see this especially in hyper-independent women. On the outside, they appear powerful, calm, self-sufficient. But many have spent so long surviving emotionally alone that partnership starts feeling like loss of control instead of emotional safety. And the tragedy is this: The very walls that protected her during loneliness may become the same walls preventing closeness later. A woman who trained herself to emotionally detach during casual relationships may struggle to emotionally attach in serious ones. A woman who spent years suppressing desire may struggle reconnecting to intimacy naturally. A woman who survived by avoiding vulnerability may unconsciously sabotage the very relationship she prayed for when she was lonely. The walls people build for protection rarely disappear when love finally arrives. That is why understanding a woman's history matters. Not to shame her, not to punish her too, but because survival patterns do not magically vanish the moment a relationship begins. And once people become emotionally attached to their defenses, they often create entire belief systems to justify keeping those defenses alive. That is where the conversation becomes even darker. After enough disappointment, some women stop protecting their heart and start protecting their worldview. You instead. This is where bitterness quietly turns into identity. You hear it in the language. All men cheat. Relationships only drain women. Men are emotionally useless. At first, these statements sound like opinions, but many times they are psychological defense systems disguised as confidence. Because if every man is the problem, then she never has to examine the walls she built herself. Now listen carefully. I am not saying bad men do not exist. They absolutely do. Some women carry legitimate wounds. Betrayal changes people. Emotional abuse changes people. Repeated disappointment can make anyone cynical. But unresolved pain has a dangerous habit of rewriting reality completely. And once someone emotionally invests in that narrative long enough, healing starts feeling threatening. Why? Because healing would require vulnerability again, accountability again, hope again, and hope becomes terrifying after years of emotional survival mode. When pain becomes identity, healing starts feeling like betrayal. That is why some women cling to emotional distance even while claiming they want connection. The defense mechanism became emotionally safer than intimacy itself. And then one day, unexpectedly, a real relationship opportunity appears. A good man enters her life, someone patient, emotionally available, genuine. But years of adaptation do not suddenly disappear because the right person showed up. In many cases, that is when the deepest internal conflict finally begins. A lot of men assume that once a woman finally meets the right guy, everything naturally falls into place. They think attraction automatically restores intimacy. It does not, because relationships do not erase conditioning overnight. A woman who spent years emotionally surviving alone often enters a new relationship carrying invisible habits she no longer notices herself. She may crave closeness deeply, then suddenly pull away the moment she receives it. She may want emotional safety but panic when someone finally gets too emotionally close. She may struggle to trust consistency because chaos became more familiar to her than peace. This confuses many men, especially emotionally healthy men. They show up honestly, communicate clearly, stay consistent. Yet the woman still seems emotionally restless, distant, or difficult to fully reach. What he often fails to realize is that he is not meeting the version of her that existed before the loneliness. He is meeting every adaptation those years created inside her. And adaptation leaves fingerprints everywhere. In the way she handles conflict, in the way she receives affection, in the way she responds after intimacy, in how quickly she expects disappointment, in how uncomfortable she feels relying on someone emotionally. Time alone does not automatically create wisdom. Sometimes it only deepens defense mechanisms. Now, to be fair, some women truly grow during singleness. They become more self-aware, more emotionally mature, more honest about what they need. But others simply become better at emotional survival while quietly losing the ability to fully connect. That is why history matters. Not because a woman should be judged for being single, but because patterns built during isolation rarely stay isolated. Eventually, they enter the relationship too. And if a man truly wants to understand the woman in front of him, there is one question more important than all the others. The wrong question is, does she have a past? Every adult has a past. The real question is, what did that past turn her into? That is the question emotionally intelligent men eventually learn to ask. Because two women can experience the exact same loneliness and emerge completely differently. One becomes wiser, softer, more self-aware. The other becomes emotionally armored, cynical, detached, and unable to trust intimacy anymore. The difference is not the pain, The difference is whether the pain was processed or simply survived. That is why you should pay attention to how a woman speaks about her years alone. Does she talk about them with clarity and honesty, or with bitterness and blame? Can she reflect on her patterns? Or does every story end with someone else being responsible for her emotional wounds? Those details matter because unresolved pain always leaks somewhere into communication, into trust, into conflict, into intimacy, into emotional availability. And this is where many men make a costly mistake. They become hypnotized by attraction and ignore emotional patterns completely. They focus on chemistry while overlooking psychological readiness for connection. A person's history matters less than the meaning they created from it. Never forget that line. You are not trying to find a woman with no scars. That woman does not exist. You are trying to find a woman who did not allow her loneliness, trauma, or emotional survival mechanisms to permanently disconnect her from intimacy itself. Because some people survive loneliness, and some become emotionally built around it. The uncomfortable truth is that years of loneliness change people, not just women people. But today I wanted you to understand something most men never stop long enough to examine carefully. A woman does not spend years without intimacy, emotional closeness, physical affection, or deep connection without developing strategies to survive the absence. Some of those strategies create growth. Others create emotional distance so deep that even love struggles to cross it later. And if you ignore that reality, you will misunderstand the woman in front of you completely. Because the issue is not whether she has been single. The issue is what those years trained her nervous system to become. Did the loneliness teach her self-awareness, emotional maturity, gratitude for genuine connection? Or did it slowly condition her to avoid vulnerability, suppress intimacy, and emotionally survive without needing anyone at all? That distinction changes everything. I have seen women become stronger through solitude, more grounded, more emotionally honest. But I have also seen women become so adapted to emotional isolation that healthy love started feeling unfamiliar to them. And that is the danger men need to recognize early instead of discovering it after becoming emotionally attached. You cannot build intimacy with someone who secretly feels safer disconnected. So stop looking only at attraction. Start paying attention to patterns. Watch how she handles closeness. Watch how she speaks about trust, men, relationships, and her past. The truth is usually hidden there long before it appears in the relationship itself. And if this video made you see modern relationships differently, subscribe and share it with another man who needs this perspective. Then tell me in the comments something honestly. Do you think long-term singleness creates wisdom or emotional distance? Because the most dangerous thing about loneliness is not being alone. It is becoming so adapted to survival that real love starts feeling unnatural.